All right, you got it.
All right. Which screen? There we go. Share. All right. Uh, so it sounds like Reed kind of did a little a little intro on Bru'n Water before, but Bru'n Water is it's a free Excel sheet run by Martin Brumgard. Yeah, Brungard. I'm gonna butcher that name even more. He also has a paid version of the app. Everything I'm showing you right now, and I'll upload it to Discord afterwards, is using the free version. This is basically, from the beer brewing perspective, like one of the go-to applications for trying to solve water chemistry. With that said, there is a lot of pages and things that are very specific to beer brewing. I will show you kind of how I have hacked this together to work for sake. Um, and so, yeah, that's the short and long of it. For anyone who is getting into water chemistry is complex as shit. It is super confusing. I am not an expert on this. I have just spent many, many years reading documents, trying to parse some of this together. Like this is like, a cursory glance into a lot of things. So I'm not going to have all the answers. Reed won't have all the answers. We will do the best we can. All water people, have discovered the deep, deep rabbit hole that this is. But regardless, this is a super powerful tool. And so I'll try and hack this together so we can talk about what it means for sake, how we can leverage it, and kind of, why do we care about this? So obviously, we care about water chemistry because water makes up such a large portion of our sake. And so I'll just go ahead and kind of hop in. There's multiple tabs on here. The water report is probably the first thing that is important that we're going to need to do. I've changed it to liters just given sake measurements makes it a little bit easier. And I've already pre-filled this in. I live in Seattle, Washington, so I have pre-filled this with our super pure Seattle water report. I will run through an example later of how you use this when you have trash water, and you need to try and modify things to get a slightly more balanced profile. But depending on where you live, you can almost always get this for free from your local city. Most cities get their water from more than one source, so there isn't an easy way. You can try and pick the one that you're closest to, but this will change quarterly, daily, monthly, depending on numerous conditions. So if you really, really care about this, you'll be updating it every time you get a report. I've noticed in Seattle, it's like plus or minus 2% year over year difference. So close enough. Um, the app itself does do a really good job giving you like hints on, different cities report the ions in different ways. And so depending on, hey, for sulfate, multiply this by 3 if it's listed this way. So it gives you a lot of hints. This is probably the hardest because you may have to do some looking around here. If you have a water report that you're curious about, feel free to reach out to me. I can try and help translate it to the best of my ability. Um, but yeah, if you aren't able to get a water report or you're on well water and you're curious, like Ward Labs is a fairly cheap and easy way to do your water sample. um, and so step one is get that water report, fill in these based on parts per million or milligrams per liter. Um, and that will start prepping everything. It also has a bunch of like color coordinated things that as you start changing these values, like if you mess it up or you did a multiplication wrong, it tries to give you some hints. Like I think as an example, if I get rid of, let's see if this actually works. No, maybe it was an alkalinity. There's one of these where as you start doing it, certain cells will start highlighting red and being like your ion concentration is probably out. He tried to make it as user friendly as possible as you're entering in these some of these things, but realistically, it's really hard. And since this is built around beer and not sake, there will be some cases in here where we're just gonna have to ignore the red boxes and skip over it. Um, the second section is all around sparging. Sparging is part of beer. There's nothing on here we really need to adjust on here. I always leave this default. This is specifically if you're trying to like wash out, your sparge, you can do different types of acidification. So skip this. We don't need it. Grain bill. So this is normally where you'd enter in your grist if you're a beer brewer. For this version, I will share out. I just have rice. I've already converted into kilograms with the Lovabond color. The Lovabond affects like the buffering capacity when you start to deal with like ion concentration and things. If you don't know what buffering capacity is, don't worry, no one else does. But basically, like seriously, it's a mess. But rice is one. I'll come back to what are the amounts we should be using here in a second. For this example, I have it defaulted to 12. I'll come back and explain a little bit more of the theory behind this in a bit. And then we'll get to the actual water chemistry itself, and this is where all the magic happens. And so first, I'm going to talk through a few things I've done to make this a little bit easier for people. And then two, I'll kind of walk through how we use it itself. The first is that, once again, because this is a beer brewing towards the bottom, they have a bunch of water profiles based on areas. And one of the ones at the very, very bottom was a user entered one. Since we, worship Miyamizu as a god, I figured I would take the ion concentration of Miyamizu and throw it in here as a baseline for some people. Once again, pick your favorite region, add it in here, and you can kind of build your water based on that. So you'll see that up at the top, I've selected Miyamizu. There's a drop down for all of them. But in essence, what this is telling us, and if ignore, SRM is a term used for determining beer color. So ours should be, very low SRM because rice doesn't have much of a color. But this will basically show you that for Miyamizu, we are trying to get to 37 parts per million of calcium, 6 magnesium, all the way down. And so this is what we're trying to get. What is here for the existing water profile is my Seattle water that we're trying to hit. There's an RO water, so if you are going to be, diluting your water with RO, which usually has much, much less ions, this is what you'll do if you have like water like Burton-on-Trent or some of these other, more famous hard waters. You're probably going to need to dilute it. And this cell here tells you the percentage you're going to dilute with. So if you have very hard water, you may just want to skip your water source altogether. If you're somewhere in the middle, maybe 50%. A lot of this, sadly, is playing with numbers to get it to what you want it to. I am unaware, and Reed, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the free version of the app allows any type of, automatic heuristic for solving this. I think some of the paid ones do, but I haven't spent the money. So you'll be doing a lot of things by yourself. The other
The paid
things are
ones don't help much either.
Okay, cool.
They try to help, but it doesn't help much.
Cool. Good to know. And then the purpose of this app is to really say, like, when you're doing your mashing, so when you have your water at the temperature to try and activate the enzymes in the grain to extract sugar, you have a pH that you're trying to hit. And so this should be based on calculations of how much rice we have to how much water we are using, 15 liters, based on my current water and no amount of mineral additions. I should end up at around a 5.7 pH. And it will automatically change this number as we start, playing with some of the different salt additions as we go. So now before I start playing with some of the additions, I want to talk about some of the numbers. So right now I'm tracking with 15 liters of water. If we hop back to the grain bill, I picked 12 kilograms of rice. For those that are following along, that's 125% water to the amount of rice that we're doing. Why would you want to do this? We'll say this is your Hatsu edition. And so, this is the amount I need to add of rice. So both rice and koji plus water into an addition. And you want to have a specific water profile. This is a way to add the mineral additions to the water in order to achieve as close to that water profile as you are looking for. Now, you may say, well, hey, when you're doing a Hatsu, there's a lot of other additions in there. You have your Moto, you have everything else in there. And yeah, That's totally there. Hopefully at this point you've been adding, if you want to add, mineral additions and things. This isn't an exact science. So you'll get, close-ish, and there isn't really a good, affordable, and what's the word for it? Uh, efficient and correct way of measuring water chemistry on the fly. So everything we're doing is a rough target of things. But obviously this is for folks that do want to really mess around and play with it. So I'm pretending like this is a Hatsu or whatever edition you want it to.
A
And so
quick
now,
note.
oh yeah, go on.
Sorry. A quick note. So I'm pretty sure Bru'n Water does this. Most of these guys assume that you're mashing at about 150 Fahrenheit.
This is true.
And so the pH calculation is based off of if everything is at that temperature.
Correct. And so you will run into that. And this is where, for me personally, I don't use the pH in here because, especially if we're talking like multiple additions at this point, like you're adding water, rice, koji into an already fermenting thing that has its own pH with its own buffering capacity, etc. So this is not, this will not calculate all of this. But in some cases, this can be helpful for, maybe doing a Shubo or a Moto. But to Reed's point, the temperature is going to be off. Always measure your pH, have a pH meter, go from there. But thank you for the call out. And so then we get down to the mineral edition. And so, here's a bunch of common minerals that we use in like the beer side of the house. And one thing you'll call out if we look at gypsum, gypsum adds, primarily calcium and sulfate. And that's where you'll see these little yellow boxes along the way, which will say, as I start to increase this grams per liter addition, you'll see these numbers start to change. And so as an example, a reminder, we're trying to go for, 37 calcium and around 29 sulfate. Let's pick a random number and see where we end up. So adding 0.05 grams per liter will give me roughly 11 calcium, 29 or 28 sulfate. And you'll see that this bottom row now where it says mashing water profile has adjusted to where I'm trying to move. And so now you play the fun guessing game of which one do I do next? How much do I do? And so you start to play with this. One thing to note is that not all minerals are created equal. So as you can see, when I do gypsum, I'm getting less calcium, more sulfate out of this versus like calcium chloride. We'll do it at the exact same amount. So sometimes you'll see these pop up, these blue things. This is where they say that there's like circular references in Excel. Just ignore them. I've tried to get rid of them, and there's probably a better way of doing it, but I can't figure it out for the life of me. But once again, the same amount of calcium chloride is providing more calcium than the gypsum, and that's because of chemistry. But we're not here to get into that. And so, yeah, so now you'll see, okay, I'm getting closer to, or I'm technically over my sulfate, closer to the chloride, 35 to 32, decent on the calcium. The only things I'm really missing are magnesium and sodium. And so you just continue to play with these numbers till you get as close. In reality, you will never hit the numbers perfectly because, one, water chemistry is complex. Two, if it was this easy, we wouldn't need an app for this. So a lot of times we really have to think of what is the what are these and what are they doing and why are they important. So calcium's really important from a yeast health perspective. Usually in beer fermentations, 50 parts per million calcium is the recommendation for healthy yeast from that perspective, but we can't say that is analogous to sake because in beer and wine, you're starting with a lot of sugar all at once and trying to eat it, as opposed to what happens in sake with multiple parallel fermentations. What is the healthy amount of calcium? Who the fuck knows? Clearly, Miyamizu worked for a while, so keeping it within that range probably healthy. Magnesium also needed for yeast health in small amounts. Sodium, or let's talk sulfate to chloride. So sulfate and chloride in ratio form of what's your sulfate to chloride ratio helps determine bitterness and how these type and how this interaction plays on the tongue itself. So if you talk about, like was it like the New England like IPA style, like they have a rough sulfate to chloride ratio that people tend to target. If you're like if you drink saisons, you're looking for another profile because they tend to dry your mouth out, and so you can use these to influence these combinations of things. I have not used this on the sake context side, but the one interesting thing to note is that the sulfate to chloride ratio is almost 1-to-1 in Miyamizu and fairly low. So probably keep them within that profile, and then feel free to experiment for there. I forget for the life of me what sodium does outside of the salinity side of the house, but I tend to keep that one low. Keeping Epsom salt's one of the more commonly available magnesium sources, but I know that it does bump your sulfate pretty high the second you start playing with it. And so yeah, this is in essence what I have done when playing with water profiles. I will say I am very lucky to live in Seattle where our water profile is dope. It's very nice. Um, if you were, oh god, that sucks. If you were, you know, living in Burton on Trent, very famous in the beer brewing for their ion concentration. I mean, 275 calcium, 610 sulfate. Yeah, good luck trying to get this down to like Miyamizu percentages. I wanted to load this as an example just to really show this is where the percent dilution of water for RO comes in. So, as an example, if I'm going to dilute, half and half, let's see, we're still way over on calcium, way over on sulfate, and chloride's real low. So for those of you that are unlucky and really needing to, and live in extremely hard water areas, you basically need to dilute your water almost to like 90 something percent. In that point, it's better to just buy RO water and use that instead. But at least wanted to show that this is a way to manipulate that from the water chemistry side. Um, that is how I have used this. I have done this at its largest amount on was it like 4 gallon batches or so, and I rarely do it for the Shubo just because it's such a small addition and my water is great. But I have used Miyamizu water before. I have manipulated the chemistry slightly. I've tried bumping calcium up a little bit, but like with sake and Banryu, there's a million factors here, and so I can't tell you that any one thing has made a difference. But this is another way to potentially play with things. But yeah, that was the short little demo of things. I'll pause and see if there are any questions, comments, and I think Reed and I can try and tag team chemistry as much as possible to answer it.
Don't you put that evil on me.
Oh, I did.
I
Yeah, you're
feel
signed
like
up now.
I feel like we need we need Reed to just give like an immediate like hot take on this. If JJ was here, he'd rip in pretty hard. But is there any are there any questions or any comments off the bat anyone has?
I guess while people think, there is a section at the bottom for adding like lactic acid. You could change this to be like phosphoric and other types of acid. As it pertains to sake in particular, we're not usually trying to hit, with the exception of the Shubo, we're not making these type of adjustments. I just point this out that this is here in case you need it. And as Reed mentioned earlier, I would not recommend using this for a pure Shubo calculation given the temperature difference, but it'll give you a ballpark. And you can use this as a rough approximate, but just another tool in the toolbox.
Can you explain why temperature again comes into play?
It is because I believe that with everything in chemistry, everything has a specific baseline in terms of temperature, molecular composition, etc. And so I don't remember like what a change in temperature, like how it affects the pH, but since obviously the temperature we are using is different, there will be a difference in the pH. I can't tell you if it's 1%, 5% difference, etc., but there will be some difference. Reed, I don't know if you know any more of that.
It's I mean, there's a lot of reasons, especially depending on like buffered solutions and things like that. Just understand that everything is stoichiometry, if
Mhm.
you remember stoke, and stoke changes at different temperatures. So things, a reaction, a hydrogen molecule will, or a hydrogen atom will disassociate more readily at a different temperature from certain things. Is the
I too,
best way to put it.
I too am hydrogen and dissociate at different temperatures.
Yeah.
Usually hotter. Uh,
Yeah, the hotter you get, technically, the more you should expect to see a drop. Technically.
Technically,
Technically.
but yeah, like from using this to baseline some of these, you're not going to be off by more than like 0.1, 0.2 from what I've played with before. It's not, because pH is an exponential. So you're not going to be aggressively off, but you can't just be, yeah, like don't expect perfection in water chemistry, but you can probably use it as a rough baseline for
Yeah.
most things.
I don't
And
know
so
if
just
this is like, oh, I'm sorry. Was that you, Reed? You can
well,
go ahead.
yeah, well, so just to kind of comment, you guys will he mentioned that like lava bond, if you change your lava bond, that is increasing or that's going to lower your pH.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is in malt barley, which is mostly used in beer or grain in general, um, lava bond is a truly a measure of the amount that it's been kilned, and the kilning process produces acids.
Yep.
So it's a
Think you use coffee as an analogy, like
yeah.
like the light roast to dark roast, you're going to taste an
Mhm.
acid difference, and so similar with
Con
grains,
yeah, conceivably, if you wanted to toast your rice, you
which
could
which I have
increase the
done.
lava bond,
Yeah,
and then you would have a lower pH.
correct.
An interesting note about that specifically is that in places, you'll notice that certain beer styles became popular in places that their water profile made sense for that beer style.
Yep.
So with Dublin is a very simple, like very easy one. They've got a pretty hard water. You needed a lot of roast malts to get into a efficient pH range because 5.2 to 5.5 is kind of where you want to be when mashing to increase your enzyme activity. And so you needed to, in order to get fully fermentable and fully converted mashes, you needed to have more acidity. You needed to have some way to add that acidity. The easiest way was to add very roast grain. Thus, you have a porter born,
Yep.
or technically a stout. But yeah.
So I was gonna just ask, in the case that someone wants to target a specific, other than Miyamizu, would you
Mhm.
recommend they just overwrite what you have down there?
Yep. Yeah, I will share this out, but yeah, I would, you can technically overwrite any of these because it's just a drop down list and who really needs them. But yeah, pick one Miyamizu and then just go your calcium, magnesium, sodium, sulfate, chloride, bicarbonate.
Did you add the minerals, the ppm for the RO water? Is that your profile of RO, or is that
That was the default RO that comes out of here. I believe that's in
the water report? Okay.
it's one of these. I forget which one.
Yeah, I'm
But
only
there.
asking because I know some people have RO systems. Like I have an
Mhm.
RO system, but I don't. I have not tested it recently. I assume it's different than other people's RO systems.
No.
Yeah, let me remind myself where that is. Oh, it's
Because
down here. Yeah, so at the very bottom they have dilution RO water, distilled water, so you can definitely update that if you need to for your own system.
but you would recommend people obviously sending it away to the lab to like make sure they actually know what their RO is relatively spitting out if they're going to try
I'm
to calculate against it.
I think like this is where the answer is it depends. So brewing with RO water, regardless of the mineral concentration, is going to almost always be more pure than your local water, from that perspective. So, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say what this difference is going to be from a numbers perspective, but it'll be fairly low. It'll be clearly cleaner than the Seattle water where we just have snow melt. So I think if you're hyper obsessed with it, doing that is probably worth it, just to know. But
Well,
yes, good job, Bob. But yeah, I forget how much Water Labs is now. I want to
about
say it's
30
like
bucks.
$30. Okay, yeah, I was gonna guess 40 to 50. So it's cheapish, and you can definitely do it once and then be done with it. But probably using the default will get you close enough. But once again, I mean, since if you're trying to model after Miyamizu, it's such light, pure water. Um, at this point, I can't say with a certainty how much small changes impact. It will probably do a side-by-side brew at some point where I really fuck with the sulfate and chloride ratios. But play with going to an extreme. I know that what are they called? Brooklyn Cura, when Nathan was there, tried their Burton on Trent and could definitely taste a difference. Or was that you, Lucas? I forget which one, but there is a difference.
Yeah, it was Michael and I were there.
Okay.
So it was insane.
But I would say if you're cash strapped, nah, you don't need to. If you do want to really start playing with super finite things, then yeah, worth it then.
Water is as important as you make it.
Mm.
And this is the comment to you, Lucas, also on you got your own RO system, but this is when you do TOA tests, taste and odor, because if you notice a taste or you notice an odor, you got a problem or something strange.
Yeah.
In all honesty, I love that you brought up the TOA in the first place. It's not something that I know that I even practice at the brewery, and that I will. But even out of the RO system at the house, I mean, it is a fascinating thing to, we were gone for a month and a half, coming back, tasting that, and going, oh, this is different. It is noticeably not what it was when we left. Probably because it's been sitting in this tank, and even if it's been cold, it's still not the same. Some quality about it is different, whether that's ionization or something, whatever it is, the taste is different. So it was interesting thinking about it from that perspective, and that's something now. Even if it runs throughout the day, if we're using it more or less on any given week, you can kind of tell, because it's about I think it's almost a 4-gallon tank that ours sits in. It's not huge, but for drinking water, that's huge. And yeah, I mean, if it's been drained down a half and it comes back up throughout the day, it tastes fresher. So we'll definitely add that to the repertoire of things.
Yeah, I mean, go on.
There any other target water profiles that are popular other than the Mizu? Anything else that you guys have played with?
Great, you asked. There is, and I will point you at the doc. I'm going to put it on the chat right now. But that,
if you wanted to go to a region in Japan and that has sake that you like, they publish their water profiles.
So if you look in the chat, I've added
Tokusui. Yeah.
a
Fushimi.
brewing. This is the Koji Sake bibliography we put together. I'm going to break them out at some point, but there's I've highlighted a few on mine, but there is one called the Brewing Water for Production of Sake. It's a document that Japan published in 1982. But then there's 14 different documents I tracked down at one point that all are on studies on sake brewing water, and they have painstakingly gone through and accessed hundreds of water profiles, and they all list them out with these exact specifications. Now, granted, some of them are older, but totally worth it. Hold on, Google's making me answer one of those click every kettle things. ugh, I gotta go find this thing again. Anyway, suffice it to say, there's a whole bunch of articles there worth checking out. And they are in Japanese, but I will, like I said, I've been wanting to go back and translate a few of these just so you can find it. But there's one that I swear it literally has pages of this one chart, and it goes like city by city by city in Japan. Like every brewery was essentially analyzed, and they presented their full water chemistry. Now, granted, it was probably from the 80s or the 90s, but if I'm being
I
honest,
have something like that. I can upload a picture to the
you do have it.
Discord. Yeah, something like that.
Okay,
Yeah, and
yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I was gonna say if there is a more reliable source or like known one, I can definitely, just like we'll have a spot for where we'll post this, and I'll just keep updating it with some of these profiles as we go.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. I think that's the way to go. And this has already been great. I was gonna say before we drag this piece of this out, because we'll record this and put it up. Are there any other questions related to this that people think are kind of like questions anyone would have? I mean, even if it's not your question, something that you're like, I wouldn't have known this if I didn't already know.
I think one thing I did not call out explicitly in the demo is, let's say you're done. So like this is good enough. You're not going to use these numbers. Actually, over here under where it says mash water volume, this will tell you the actual amount of minerals that you do want to add. I don't think I ever explicitly said that. So if if our final profile we're okay with is this, you'd add 0.8 grams, 0.8 grams into the water. Fun fact: the warmer the water is, the easier some of these things will dissolve into it. So keep that in mind. Some of these, like calcium chloride is an example. Chalk is another one. Takes them forever to fully dissolve unless it's a little warm. It's a lot easier when you're making beer and things are at 140F or higher. But just something to keep in mind. But yeah, just look to this side when you are done.
Also, just a comment, they've got it in most of the minerals, but if you do leave these and you don't leave them in a desiccated chamber, they will hydrate themselves. They will
Yes.
hold moisture. And so the weight will be different.
Mhm.
You won't be adding the right amount. It's
Correct.
really not an issue on small scales, but it can be an issue.
Would anyone feel comfortable, Reed, Jordan, anyone that wants to just talk really quick? I know we've mentioned this in text and on the Discord, but could anyone talk really briefly just about the difference in ionization and like what are you referring to, like chloride, chlorine? I know that was the discussion we just had, and I feel like it's worth mentioning because if anyone is diving into this and they happen to go online to buy a certain chemical or mineral, I should say, to put into their their mash, that they're not picking the wrong thing.
Sure. So I will save, to before we go into like the actual chemistry of things, the only things you should be buying are things listed here in the mineral section. Gypsum, calcium chloride, Epsom salts. Like these are very common and standard in like the beer brewing world of things, and you can buy these at almost any like local homebrew store, or I would assume like larger supplier as well. So if you really do want to make changes, only buy things that are in this list. Pickling lime is really, I found, a weird one and a hard one to find at times. But you usually need that more for pH adjustment or bicarbonate adjustment, which most people shouldn't have to do in sake. But regardless, picking up any of these, almost guaranteed you can pick up anywhere from a homebrew store perspective. That's all you should be buying outside of lactic acid for your shubos, unless you're wild and only Kimoto and Yamahai. But that's what you should buy so you don't kill yourself. Then there's the chemistry side.
So
And
I'm sorry, Reed, I don't mean to cut you
Okay.
off. I wanted to throw this one out there before it slipped out of my head again. When you're brewing beer, right, you have your entire water addition basically all at once, right?
Yep.
Where making sake, not so much on the homebrew scale maybe, but certainly on the commercial scale, your water additions are divided up, and you're talking 0.8 of a gram of
Yep.
minerals here for homebrew scale, right? So dividing that up even further is going to be kind of difficult. So how are you attacking that?
Yeah, and so this is where, depending on the size of the batch I do, 100 almost always roughly correlates to whether I play with mineral additions. So for my what I consider large batches, so like 4.5 gallons and above, I will usually do some mineral addition. I do also have a scale that does go to 1/100th of a gram. So I do have that precision to deal with some of these. Granted, they do kind of round up in here, but I will use that. I usually don't, or I historically have not used water chemistry for Shubos and first editions. I usually save that for later editions, or if we're doing like an all-in-one. That's how I solve it. When I start going to smaller and smaller scale, like Mike Simmons size, yeah, then it's really hard to measure. And at that point, your mileage will vary for sure.
Was that a comment about Mike Simmons' size, or was that his ferments?
His ferment size.
I just recommend. I mean,
Just want
if
to
you're
make
gonna
sure
do a
we're
5-gallon
throwing a
batch of something or anything, just go buy a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, fill it, put all
Yep.
your salts in there, and then just take from there.
You can also do that, or do that if you have like kegs because you're a brewer and you fill them with water. Another place to keep them.
Right. But then you run into, issues with storing water, right?
Mhm.
And Reed has told us all about that already.
Yes.
So I don't really need to go into detail there. So I was just interested to hear how everyone is approaching that particular piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I do it for later editions primarily, if I do it. But I haven't done enough large batches recently. So once I have my first batch going again after about a year. And so once I practice a little bit more, we'll start doing more side by sides and larger amounts to actually start tasting a side by side difference and see. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, for those that want to do it earlier and do smaller batches, this probably isn't the method, but Banryu.
Another thing I've used is the potassium chloride, right?
Mhm.
Or I normally add minerals and yeast nutrients to the starter when I do shokujo, and then just use the purified water, from the 5 gallons at the grocery store or whatever for the rest of the batch. But
Yeah, and not all yeast nutrient is treated equally. So depending on which brand of yeast nutrient you're buying, you may get different trace mineral additions and things, like depending on how much DAP ammonium phos. No, I'm not going to butcher that one. But yeah, so just a thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
So Nathan makes a really, really good point there, actually. Potassium chloride is a really common additive for sake, and it's not represented here.
That is true. That is one of the faults, if you would say, of Bru'n Water is it only has the chemical, or like the breakdown of these minerals in particular. So yeah, if you do use that one, it is a like you are blind to that at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a fault so much as maybe a reason or inspiration to develop our own calculator like this.
Oh, good luck with that. I would love someone to put one of those together. Hey, Reed, want to take that one on?
I was
Share something. I've got one. I've already got one, but it's not got everything sake involved. You have it. You literally have it.
Oh,
Lucas.
perfect.
well
It's buried in the information library.
The other thing we could potentially do is reach out to Martin and ask if we wanted to add that, what that would look like is just like another row. I know, I mean, I'm not saying he will do it for free, but it is a consideration.
It would be curious to see if that's like a, oh yeah, sure, it's not a big deal, or if he's like, oh God, no, that's going to be such a huge undertaking. I mean, I don't know what the back end of this thing. I haven't looked at the formulas for this, but knowing how it is to set up them for other things, I can only imagine it's probably complicated. But he might be willing to do it.
Ugh, man, with all my free time, yeah.
I guess it's a good time. I'll bounce off a few of the comments because there's lots of good ones. For small scale or really any scale homebrewing, this is fantastic. Oh yeah, that was my number one comment. Thanks, Jordan. This was a fantastic presentation. You did such a good job on it. Very thorough, and yeah, it can and does work. If you want to do small scale, you can pre-batch out all these salts, and then you just have to weigh one amount. They do play nice pretty well together when stored together. And I've tried to be a purist in the past and sometimes just do a single water profile. But on just this last batch, finally adding some yeast nutrient again, which again is totally unknown composition, it worked out so well. I'm not sure I'll be able to go back. And it means I won't know the water chemistry, and I'm just okay with that. But if I add equal parts yeast nutrient to mineral salts, I've blown any kind of profile out of the water. I'm just taking that as a given. And that's fine.
If it works.
If anyone wants to get really nerdy and do even more water profiles with even more additives, there's another mineral calculator, also Excel, also free. It goes by Kymos Mineral Waters, and it's the one I've been using all along. It basically does the same job, but you can do more different types of ions, see more of the chemistry behind it. So if anyone wants to go beyond Bru'n Water, it's another free and good accessible one.